So one of the examples that Sowell gives in this book is the difference in the coastlines between Africa and Europe. Even though Africa has a larger coast than Europe in terms of, they have so much that gives to the sea. Not everything is good for harbor, for the ships to park. Uh, so, and this is because it is because of the sea. It's simple as that. It's just because uh, the ships can't harbor in safe areas where you can move the merchandise. And Europe has this. Europe has um, several connections to the sea, where it's safe because the land is kind of surrounding those patches of water, so it makes it safer for ships to go there. So they have more of these harbors, and obviously by having more of them, you're able to move more merchandise, and it's a geographical advantage that no one had any control over it. Another factor to take in consideration is that it is in the coast where there have been a larger range of economic and social interactions with other coast people. And this has helped the people in the coast to improve their knowledge and lifestyle faster than people from the inland. And in a good amount, like a general pattern has been that these coast places have been the first one to develop, and then it, especially when we're talking about metropolitan, I believe, and this coast, once they developed, it starts like spreading to the inland. Again, it's just geography. It's just how it happens as a general pattern. Different parts of the world have different climates, which have different type of agriculture. In some, it's easier to grow crops than in other ones, and some crops don't grow in certain places and others do. Again, it's just how it is. No one has control of this. And this will be actually a good factor to take in consideration when we are studying the history of when Europeans arrived to America. So there were so many differences, but three are the main ones. That is the vessels, the animals, and the immune system. So because Europe was more interconnected, as in compared to America, the Native Americans to the Mayans or the Incas, as in America, the different natives didn't have communication between them. If they could have had communication, maybe things would have been different. But in Europe, because they're tiny compared to United States, so they're different cultures, they're different groups of people could interact with one another way more than, again, Americans could have interact with them, which caused several advantages for Europeans. Among them, it was the increase of knowledge and even diseases. Europeans had several diseases that would destroy a good amount of their population, but this helped them to create stronger immune systems compared to the Native Americans, that they didn't have, because they didn't have that much interaction with others, they didn't suffer from diseases. So when the Europeans arrived and they had all these bacteria in their bodies, and it just spread naturally to the natives, it really destroyed like half of their population, and this was a key factor for them to conquer so easily. Uh, and when we look at the knowledge, for example, mm, the Europeans, I mean, okay, so they arrived also with vessels because with all this knowledge that they were exchanging, they were able to, especially also with the Chinese, they were able to create huge vessels that could make them capable to go to cross the sea, compared to the natives of America, where they, because they didn't have this knowledge, they only had canoes that obviously you cannot cross the entire ocean with a canoe. Um, and another interesting factor that I liked, it was that, for example, they also arrived with big animals, which again in America, and when I say America in this case, I mean the entire continent. We didn't have that. So, for example, the Incas, they had llamas, but the Mayans didn't have big animals. And this is actually a very important factor, uh, because it so because the Mayans and the Incas were in touch with one another, so they couldn't take full advantage of what they had because they had lesser knowledge. And how this affected is that, for example, the Mayans, they created the wheel, or well, just, but because they didn't know that there were bigger animals such as the llamas, it never occurred to them to make an animal pull a merchandise or stuff, you know, with carts, because they didn't have the big animals, and the Incas, they didn't have the wheel, so the amount of goods that they were able to transport from one part to another, it was much lesser than the one the Europeans were able to do at the time. So all these differences is what made it so easy for Europeans to conquer the different parts of the natives. Uh, the lack of knowledge, it affects the skills that a society has at a time. And this has happened throughout the centuries around the world. One more recent example could be, for example, that Germans are the ones that lead the beer industry because they had developed beer through the entire of time. Um, as in they have produced beer for longer than any other society. So they lead the current industry, and they are overrepresented in the United States, in Europe, in Argentina, Brazil, and Australia. So it just happened again because their society have developed through history to reach that level of skill. And as Sowell says it in the book, is like, is it fair for Germans to have such knowledge in beer so that they can be the leaders of the industry? Well, no, but that doesn't mean they are oppressing other beer industries. They just have had accumulated knowledge that others haven't. And it's one of the things that happens, you know. So, Bonham Phillips said that we don't live in the past, but the past lives in us. And the German beer is just one of the examples.